Welcome to the Tripod NRL 2021 season preview. I'm Jacob Wynn. We break down every NRL game every week from a punting perspective, but of course with the season kicking off in 8 nights' time, we're going to look at all 16 teams before the season, overall prospects, not the specific round 1 matchups, that'll be in a week's time. And I've also got a couple of future value bets. Now, I hope I'm not breaking some bad news to a few of you guys who don't follow the Tripod over the summer, but Alex no longer works with the Tripod. He's taken up a position where he's been poached by one of the major bookies, so I'm running the pod on my own this season. But for this preview, I'm very lucky to be joined by Clarkey from Clarkey's Rugby League column. There's no better person to join me for a season preview because he's got all the knowledge and all the information you're going to need to set the table as we look at all 16 teams. Now, Clarkey and I sat down, we chatted about the season, got bloody excited, disagreed on a couple of things and agreed on some teams, so hope you guys enjoy it. We went over an hour with our chat, so we've actually decided we need to split this into part 1 and part 2. So what you're going to see tonight is Clarkey and I previewing the top 8 teams from last season, starting with the Penrith Panthers, working through to the Cronulla Sharks, and then we're going to run part 2 season preview tomorrow night, so just in 24 hours time. And remember, you can watch this on Facebook or YouTube, but you can also listen just to the audio on any podcast player, but there are a few graphics we're going to lay in to make it worthwhile for watching, to try and make up for you having to look at a mug like mine. Let's jump into the season preview with Clarkey.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the Penrith Panthers. So they gained Paul Momirovski, Jamin Salmon, Robert Jennings, Matt Eisenhuth, and Scott Sorensen. But they do lose a wealth of experience, in particular with James Tarmo, Josh Mansour, and Zane Tedovano, 2 big losses in the middle. They also lose a little bit of depth with Caleb Aikens, Jack Hetherington, Dane Laurie, and Malachi Watene-Zelezniak. Overall, I'd say their recruitment is relatively, I'd probably give them a C. They have lost some really experienced veterans, and whether that is the difference or not for the Panthers this year, I'll turn it over to you, because my personal opinion is I don't think you can lose players like James Tarmo and Zane Tedovano and typically perform as well in the next season. But there's just something about this Panthers side where I think they will defy that logic and still perform well.
If you're going to nitpick, if there is a weakness, I guess they are light on front rowers. To your point, losing a couple of really experienced props there, not necessarily strong recruitment. But when all your young players play so well, you got to beef up their contracts. You don't have the money to go out and spend and bring others in, and that's the reality of a salary cap league. Now, let me just say, last season, there's lots of experts around that predicted the Broncos would finish higher than the Panthers. And I'm not exaggerating. You go back and look at people's 2020 predictions, many more had Broncos top 8 and did not have Panthers top 8. And in the end, the Panthers won the final 17 games. They ran away with the minor prem. The Broncos, as we know, lost 17 of the final 18, got the wooden spoon. I'll say I was on the right side of history in having Penrith in my top 8 and having the Broncos missing. I'm not saying that to give myself a rap. I'm saying it for a couple of reasons. The NRL is not always as easy to predict as it seems. The fact that people, really thought that, and those 2 teams could not have been further apart. And the other part is, how did Penrith go so well last year? You've got to say a little bit of it was flying under the radar. They did sneak up on teams because they weren't seen as a threat. And the element of surprise does count for something. Now, I'm not saying that rolled them all the way to the minor prem. The second half of the season, they played outstanding footy. But again, I feel like they were riding a wave. Every game was bigger than the last. They had this vibe, this culture, this confidence in the squad, and the winning streak grew. And then you got to finals, and then each game was more high stakes, and they were buzzing. And I just wonder that now we come into a new season, the stakes are not as high. Like, they've got to do it all again with the preseason. I just wonder if they can harness the energy and the intensity right off the bat in 2021. Their highest level, as I look at the squad and all the key players are young, I think you can argue all of them are on a trajectory to play even better and have their best footy in front of them. So this squad's best game is as good as anybody in the competition. It's just those intangibles I'm looking at as to whether they can replicate a season finishing first on the ladder.
The Melbourne Storm have signed Remy Smith and George Jennings, 2 outside backs there. They lose Shantor Earl, Tino Malawi. I think I said that wrong. Sometimes I get it right.
Malawi.
There you go.
Yeah,
sometimes I get it right.
But you got to learn it, mate. He plays for your team now.
Oh, I've been cheating. I just call him Big Tino.
That's it.
They also lost Suliasi Vunivalu and they lost Ricky Latelli. So, again, my overall grading for them is a C. I don't think they made, the losses they have don't outweigh the gains, and the gains don't outweigh the losses. It's just sort of even there, sorry. I am very excited about Remy Smith and George Jennings for that matter, because Craig Bellamy has a long history of taking, I won't say mediocre, but I'll say NRL standard wingers and making them star level. And he's done that with Corabetti. He's done that with Adokar, Vunivalu, Matt Geyer, I suppose, to an extent, if we want to go way back then. He's consistently done it. We all agree on that. So I am very excited in that regard. And obviously their biggest loss, which I haven't mentioned yet, which is still not official, but Cameron Smith, losing him. How much does that affect them? Well, I think it will affect them in a way, but I can't see them falling out of the top 4 still. I think that they are ready-made with his replacements, having Harry Grant and Brandon Smith there. I think as big as of a loss Cameron Smith is, as well as you could be equipped to handle his loss, I think they are. The big thing for me next year and how this affects the Storm is, what is Craig Bellamy's decision around his future? Because if it does come out halfway through the year, he'll be retiring. Maybe that inspires his players in a way we've never seen the Storm inspired before. If it comes out he's signing with the Sharks or the Broncos, rival teams rumoured to be interested, then how does that affect the Storm morale? So I do think his future will play a key part in their success, but I have them a top 4 team regardless.
Yeah, I've got him in the top 4. Like, they're still so formidable, and I'm assuming Cameron Smith is not going to play for Melbourne. Like, they've named their new captains and stuff. Like, what's interesting to me is you look at what happened to them last year. They got displaced from Melbourne, had to relocate Sunny Coast. They were in camp for over 100 days. Now, was that a hindrance? They lost their home advantage. They weren't sleeping in their own bed. Like, there's mental health aspects that were struggling, being secluded. But on the other hand, of course, you can argue it was a great bonding, experience, like a siege mentality, and they all kind of came together, and they talk about how strong the bond is within the squad, and now they don't have that. So again, it's kind of like Penrith. Can they kind of seize that same level of desperation and team unity? That's the question I've got. But if you look at the games they only lost, I think, 2 times in the back half of the season, and they were both games where they had 6+ rep players out, including round 20 where they rested the whole team.
Oh, don't bring up round 20 after the tip-off.
That's right. We will talk about the tip-off later. So to me, their ceiling this year is similar to last year. Now, you might call me crazy because they've lost arguably the GOAT, but I think they can replace Cam Smith by committee. I think you can replace his dummy half play with having 2 quality, international level, really, hookers in the cheese, and Harry Grant, albeit he's got the knee injury, but when he returns a month into the season. The captaincy is covered by Finucane and J-Brom. Like, there is a good amount of leadership. I think Puppy will be the goal kicker. Now, he will need to improve on what we've seen of him in the past, but he'll obviously, dedicate himself to that. So it's not a knock on Smith. It's basically just that I think the rest of the squad can step it up. I agree with the pickup of Remus Smith there. It covers Vunivalu. You lose Tino, but Tui Kamikamitha barely played last year, was injured, and he's back. And we also know Brandon Smith can play a role, as a middle forward, as we touched on. Holding on to Welsh is a big get as well, because there was a lot of talk he was going to leave, and I think he's going to be instrumental in that forward pack. So let's look at the fact you've got arguably the best player in the game, Munster. You got Puppy, Jerome Hughes, Harry Grant in the rest of that spine. They could all be even better this year than they were last year, and they were all awesome last year. So I'll be betting against them very sparingly. I have them returning to the grand final. I'll give my full, end of season prediction at the end, but also have them in the top 4 again.
Yeah, biggest takeaways from me for what you just said is the round 1 game against the Rabbitohs. What a perfect way to start the season. Storm have not lost a round 1 game since forever. I'm not going to go back to the exact. I think it's 20
odd years, yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. It's a huge record, and this is like the first year where it's seriously like they might actually lose that to the Rabbitohs just from how red hot they looked in Charity Shield. We move on to the third team from last year, the Parramatta Eels. They had an exceptional season, 15 wins, 5 losses. They gained Michael Oldfield, Tom Opacek, who will replace Michael Jennings. He's not a loss, but he is stood down. Bryce Cartwright, Isaiah Papali'i, Joey Lussick, and Keegan Hipgrave from the Titans. However, their losses are Daniel Alvaro. They lose Andrew Davey, Kane Evans, Jai Field, David Gower, George Jennings, Brad Takai-Rangi, and Stefano Uto Ikamanu. So some considerable losses there. But one thing that I do love about the Eels signings this year, I have only given them a C+ grade overall. But when I look at the Eels last year, I thought they sort of started to slack off towards the end of the year. And what I put that down to was complacency and players within the 17 feeling as though their spot is safe week in, week out. Now, with so many great fringe and depth signings, Keegan Hipgrave, Papali'i, Cartwright, Opacek, even Oldfield has a wealth of NRL experience. These are all men that if they're playing well in the New South Wales Cup, and Brad Arthur needs to send a message to one of his players that might not be performing to their best, he can now do it. Because last year his options were inexperienced forwards like Uto Aikamanu and Oregon Kafusi. But now he has the experience to say, you know what, you're not performing, you're out, one of our depth players is in. And that's the reason why I still have the Eels as a top 4 team this year. I know a lot of people will disagree with that, judging on inconsistencies we saw last year. But I do think overall these fringe signings will help them more than we could have ever imagined.
You know what? I was about to say, here's my bold prediction. And then you went and said you've got the Eels top 4, which is bold. So I'm with you. I'm probably even more bold than you. I'm going to say they'll finish second on the ladder. I think I'm higher on the Eels than anybody this season. So hear me out, because I think there could be great value backing them. And I agree, they fell away last year, the last 2 months of the season. I'm talking about the final 6 weeks of the regular season and in the finals. But look at the finals a little closer. They played the Storm at Suncorp. They played them as well as anybody did in the finals. And then they lost a close game to a red-hot Rabbitohs. They had turmoil. Like, day of the game, Jennings was stood down.
Yeah.
They also had mid-year injuries. Moses, Dylan Brown, and Reid Marnie all had injuries at stages. And as you said, they still finished third. I think this team is hungry because they know they have the ability. They have that goal to go a step further, like making top 4 is a good achievement. Now you need to be saying we need to make it and win finals games, get to a prelim, get to a grand final. I think the forward pack is underrated. I really think the forward pack matches it with anybody. You've got a rep front row in Paulo and RCG. I think massive year for Ryan Madison. He's being touted. If he's ever going to play Origin, this is the time. New South Wales off a series loss. He's in his prime. He needs to lead by example, and he needs to really impact games on a weekly basis for the Eels. I mentioned the spine. It's another squad that they've got the continuity that those guys have all played together, the 1, 6, 7, 9, and they're all still relatively young, can all improve. People are talking about this being Brad Arthur, maybe his last chance with this group. I think that could add to the focus, motivation, and hunger. That's why I've got the Parramatta making the top 4 this year.
Most definitely. There's a lot of ifs and maybes in that. But I think overall, with what we've both justified as our reasonings as to why, there's definitely some value there.
And on that note of liking the Eels for season 2021, I know I've told you I think they'll finish second, but obviously if I'm predicting them to be top 4, which is a bit better than what the market predicts, I'm thinking they're going to be in and around the minor premiership hunt. I'm not a big fan of tying up money for too long through a season. So I would play over 13.5 season wins at $1.95. I would look at the $3.50 for top 4. I think those are good value, but they're lower odds that you'd have to tie up money for a whole season. So I'd rather tie up less and go for the longer odds. 15-1 to win the minor premiership. That's on basically all the bookies. 365, Unibet, Sportsbet, Top Sport. That's my favourite futures play for part 1 of this season preview.
We'll move on to the team that rounded out the top 4 last year, the Sydney Roosters. They gain Adam Kieran from the Warriors and Joseph Suaalii, who probably enters the season with the most hype of a rookie since, I would say, a man they lost in Sonny Bill Williams. And Hall, they lose Poasa Farmasili. They lose Mitchell Orbison and also Kyle Flanagan, who I think is a big loss for them. Now, I do have the Roosters outside of the top 4 this year. Again, I know that's controversial, but I just look to the fact that I think everyone's looking at, they've signed... sorry, I forgot to include Sam Walker as a gain there. Or was he with them last year?
Well, he's come through the juniors, probably part of the top 30 squad now. Okay,
well, in a way, you could consider him as a gain, if anything, because he is expected to play this year. But one thing I look at is, yes, Suaalii is a fantastic young rookie. However, their backline is still set. It's not like they need a winger or they need a centre or they need a fullback because there's James Tedesco there. So there's just not room for him to come in and have an immediate impact. And then I just look at the fact they do not have a genuine half next to Luke Keary. And as a result, they are moving Keary into the 7 jersey. Smart move. I like it. However, I always feel Luke Keary's best football come on that left side channel when he had the option of the Morris boys outside him. He had an option like Boyd Cordner running a short ball. And I think that taking away that from Keary, that takes out his best attributes and the area of the field in which he produced his most tries and try assists. Having him playing both sides of the field minimises what he is absolutely best at. I don't think we will see the best Luke Keary this year. I think there is too much pressure on him with an inexperienced half next to him. Boyd Cordner is out to start the season. These are all a lot of negatives, but the Roosters are still a fantastic side. So they will not fall out of the top 8, but I do see them falling out of the top 4.
I'm in agreement with you again. They're a very tricky one. Like, utmost respect I've got, and I'm sure you do as well, for Trent Robinson's dynasty at this club and the franchise in general, the way they go about their business. You know what? If Victor Radley doesn't do his ACL last year, they easily could have got back to the grand final. He was that big of a loss. And now he is back. And I'm reluctant to say a guy is going to dominate off an ACL because it's that serious of an injury. But he does have that sort of potential. We talked about how the new style of plays could perfectly suit a guy like him that can do everything in the middle of the field. Now, speaking of injuries, like even Teddy wasn't right at the end of last year. Keary's had his concussion issues. We know Boyd Cordner's like out for at least half the year. There's no guarantee he'll come back, honestly, if like whether, when they do their risk assessment and check his general, brain health, basically. A guy like Jake Friend has taken a beating his whole career. Warrior Hargraves, enforcer, is now 32 years old. You've got the Morris twins are both 33. And, I'm not saying they're not at a good level, but when you're that bit older, you're definitely on the back nine and injury, maybe more injury susceptible. So this is all the case against the Roosters. But you could also say, why are the Morris brothers back? They wouldn't be going around again unless they believed they could play at this level and they could still win the comp. And let's look at the positives, like Angus Crichton is still in his prime, Satili Tupanua prime for a big year, TKO, Joey Manu, and you mentioned Suwali is the wild card. If their best 17 is fit, all those guys are on the park and firing, on their day, they can beat anybody, as we know. And I think that they'll pace themselves through the season. They'll take care of the health of their key players. They'll obviously have players play rep footy, which is why I don't think they're a lock to make the 4. I think they'll be on the fringe. They'll want to kind of be in a position where they can peak in the last few weeks of the season and give it a crack. And they'll be hoping that that's with a Boyd Cordner back in. So that's what they'll be intending to do. A few question marks over player health and age and who's going to be in their prime. But I've got them coming 5th.
Yeah, I have to agree. I've got them on the verge of the top 4 also. I basically echo everything you said. There are a lot of negatives, but there are a lot of positives for the Roosters. And when there's, a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B, let's go to what we think is a little more outweighing the other, and then what we know in the past. We both believe the negatives are outweighing the positives slightly, but we know the Roosters perform to a high standard. So I think that's how we both sort of come to such a similar conclusion there. So let's move on to the Raiders. Their gains are Ryan James, Harry Rushton, and Caleb Aiken. They lose John Bateman, Nick Kotrick, and Michael Oldfield. So it's hard to grade that because obviously if Ryan James does come back and perform to the standard which he has in the past, then it's a masterstroke. It's a fantastic signing and it doesn't break the bank. Harry Rushton is one of the most exciting young prospects out of the UK. And Caleb Aikens there obviously did a role for the Panthers while Edwards was out injured last year. John Bateman and Nick Kotrick are big losses for me. But I look at this Raiders side. I do think their ceiling is top 4 this year. I do think they'll be up around the top 4. In fact, I am comfortable making a prediction they will make the top 4. My main reasoning behind that is I just look at their players and in particular their middle depth. Now, in my predicted 17, I didn't have, who was it? Emre Gula. I didn't have room for Ryan Sutton. I didn't have room for Saliba Havili. These are all experienced campaigners that, would walk into a lot of other 17s. And so I do think, and I didn't have Sia Soliola. That's the other name I was forgetting. So there's some big names. So I do think Ricky Stewart has the option to rest his middle forwards as he needs. And I mean, a rested forward pack with someone like Josh Papali and leading them with Josh Hodgson steering the ship from dummy half again. I think that's the key, Jacob. I think I look at Josh Hodgson. He will steer the ship from dummy half, similar to how Cameron Smith did last year for the Storm. And when Cameron Smith / Josh Hodgson controls that ruck, it allows the halves to attack the line and play a running game. When you look at running halves in the competition, I think we both have to agree that George Williams and Jack Whiten are right up there as the best. Combining every factor I've just said there, I've got them a top 4 team this year.
Well, I guess we do have a slight disagreement because that means you're leaving out the next team out of the top 4, which I can't do. So I'm actually more putting the Raiders on the fringe in 6th, just behind the Roosters, definitely pushing top 4. I actually had a lot of the same conclusions though. Like I look at this team And I think it is the deepest squad in the NRL, exactly as you outlined in terms of how many first-grade caliber players they have in their squad. And that's why I totally understand you putting them in the top 4, because that helps you win a lot of regular season games, not only because you're covered for injuries, but also competition for spots can be very healthy and keeps everyone on the top of their game. Now, look, the loss of Bateman, you just can't replace him. And I feel we're blessed as footy fans that we got to watch him play NRL for the last 2 years, because he was just an incredible X factor. It seemed like every touch he had was such quality. Hodgson return is big. Whiten won the Dally M last year, so you don't need to say much more about him. He's in his prime. I hope that their depth means they don't burn out Josh Papali. Obviously, he's the leader of their forward pack. He's the leader of Queensland's forward pack. So you talk about how the big man, is not as important, or, is going to become more rare. To me, he's the exception. Like, you're going to have to be a big man that somehow also is incredibly high energy and like incredible motor, and that's what makes him, so special. Exactly.
Or Papali.
If you're going to have that size, you've also got to have an incredible engine, and that's what makes him such a special player. I have got them on the fringe, maybe just because I don't see their ceiling on the same level as the 5 teams that I've put above them.
Okay, yeah, I'd have to agree with everything you said there, and I will move on to the next team here with the Rabbitohs, but I will preface this with I am going to cheat a little bit because I do see the Rabbitohs as a top 4 side also. So I know I've said 5 teams I see within that top 4, but it's just there's going to be so much competition this year, and the 5 teams that I do have there, it's really hard to see either of them or any of them really missing out on the top 4 when you consider especially the signings here for the Rabbitohs. So they gain Jai Arrow, Jacob Host, Josh Mansour, Benji Marshall, Tane Milne, Tautau Moga. They lose Ethan Lowe to retirement, James Roberts, Bailey Sirenen, Jack Johns, Tom Amone, and Corey Allen. Now, I'm not going to tell someone to check their salary cap, but I am going to tell someone to check their salary cap because this team is absolutely loaded. We spoke about the 14 needing to be a specialist member of some place within the spine. And hello, Benji Marshall. There's just no one more perfect for that role. He is a veteran that is so crafty. He will not miss opportunities. If he does have one downfall in his game, it has always been his defense. So let's put him in the 14 role where he can come on and attack with weapons like Latrell Mitchell, Cody Walker, and not necessarily have to worry about defending for the full 80. Now, there are some significant losses for them. I think most notably from the players lost is Bailey Sirenen and Corey Allen for me, just because I thought they were the next generation of stars sort of coming in there for the Rabbitohs. But to then replace them with Jacob Host and Josh Mansour, you can tell that, obviously looking at the now, then those are fantastic replacements. A overall for how they've recruited, an A+ for how I think they'll perform this year. I wouldn't be too shocked to see them send Wayne Bennett out a winner in his final year at the club.
You know what? The first thing I'll say is going to sound really silly. I would like the Rabbitohs more if everyone else didn't love them, because I just feel weird that like everyone's on the Rabbitohs bandwagon. Right. Everyone's picking them to win the comp in 2021, including in our group. We put a poll up in the Tripod group. They were overwhelmingly the most popular pick, and it's understandable why. They finished last year playing fantastic, enterprising footy, embracing the skills of their star players and the new rules, and that was despite losing Latrell for the last few weeks. Who knows how much further they could have gone if he'd been there. And then you even throw in like Bennett masterminded one of the all-time great Origin Series wins. Got to give a shout out to the Maroons for that, which clearly shows he's still on the top of his game. You add Mansour to the back line, you add Jai Arrow to the forward pack. And maybe a year ago, people were questioning the forwards because they were just 1 year removed from losing Sam Burgess. But like, what have we seen since then? The emergence of Totola, Jaden Sewer, Kaloa Matangi, and obviously the super all-round human being that is Cam Murray.
Oh, yeah.
And then, we know games are won in the spine, and the spine doesn't get much better. Now Latrell's back, and obviously the halves, and Damien Cook at hooker. And you got the finishers, you got AJ, Gagai, Graham outside. So I can't really fault this team. Absolute genuine contender. That's why I definitely have them in the top 4. It's just, again, if I go back to a punting perspective, will I find value on them every week? I'm not sure, because the secret's out. Everybody knows how good they are. So just to be clear, I think my top 4, I've gone Penrith, Parramatta, Storm, and Bunnies. And then I've got Roosters and Raiders 5th and 6th.
Perfect. And yeah, as you said, looking at value for the Rabbitohs this year from a punting perspective, obviously I'm not the expert at that on that side of the house. That's obviously yourself. But since their dominant Charity Shield victory, they've actually closed from $2.50, I think, into $2.10. So as you said, people are recognizing, people are jumping on, and it could be tough to find value in them this year. Another thing I forgot to say in my initial sort of chats there, they have lost and fallen out of the finals in the last 3 preliminaries. 3 heartbreaking years in a row where, as you said last year, Latrell Mitchell doesn't get injured. Maybe he provides that late spark they need to get over the Panthers, because that was such a close game. So they are definitely my team to watch this year. And by the sounds of it, they're the team to watch for a lot of people.
And when you talk about that odds shortening, you're talking about round 1, which is, I think,
Absolutely.
the season kickoff, which is, yeah,
Thursday.
as you said, what a game. Thursday night in 1 week's time, Storm Rabbitohs. And as good as the Rabbitohs are, they're playing in Melbourne in round 1 and they are an underdog. So that's price of $2.10 still going to sound juicy to the people who are on the bandwagon this year.
Absolutely. It's going to be, that is the best NRL opening game in so many years. So I can't wait for that one. But we'll move on to the 7th team from last year, which was, of course, the Newcastle Knights. I guess I'll get this off my chest straight away and preface everything what I'm about to say is I don't have the Knights as a top 8 team this year. I don't, under the premise that I don't think there is a significant leader within their side. They do not have a Josh Hodgson, a Cameron Smith, a Isaiah Yeo, Nathan Cleary, a James Tarmo, a dominant man to lead from the front and lead by example that every player looks up to and respects. It was Mitchell Pearce, but obviously with off-field incidents, that's no longer him. So who do they gain? They gain Bailey Hodgson and they gain Dominic Young from the UK. 2 fantastic young guns there. They gain Jack Johns, Sawasau Su, and most notably Tyson Frizzell. They lose Herman Sase, Tim Glasby, Aiden Guerra, Mason Lino, Sione Matautia, and Tautau Moga. So I do think they've recruited better here. I do think they've recruited for the future. Dominic Young had some fantastic touches in the trial. I'd be very excited for Knights fans to see his progression. But I think their ceiling, realistically, is top 8 this year. They could make the top 8. But just for the fact they don't have a leader, they'll have no impact on the overall finals and the results of this season. It's a tough take for Knights fans to take. I know they're going to be angry listening to me say that, but without a leader, it's no finals football for the Knights, in my opinion.
I think that's a really astute observation you make there, because if you just looked at the team on paper, it'd be very hard to make the case that they're not better than last year. When you look at it's either younger players that would be better and the addition of Frizzell, and they came 7th. And you're thinking, well, they've got to be 7th or better this year, because that's still a fantastic buy to jag a guy like that in his prime off one of your rivals. And I think it's an underrated forward pack when you look at all the guys that are outside the Saifidi brothers and Barnett and Fitzgibbon and still Clem as well on big money there as well. But you kind of touched on it there with the saga, which we won't go into, but all the off-field dramas. It's just like a question mark. Is there a fracture within the squad? And I tend to think this stuff gets exaggerated because they want to sell the story, so they're going to make it, worse than it is. So I would tend to think that they'll get past those things, like the Adam O'Brien beat up and stuff. I don't see it, why it should be a big deal. Now, I think we've drawn a line in the sand that the first 6 teams we spoke about, although there could be 1 or 2 more coming up that you think are in the same class, but for me, we are down a level now where I don't have any more teams that I think could win the comp this year. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but that's just the way I see a bit of a separation there. What's the weakness in this team? For me, it's kind of same as last year. Not a lot of strike outside backs. Bradman Best is the exception because he's an absolute beast, but I think the very best teams have more match winners in the outside backs. You got Ponga's recovery taking longer than anticipated. I guess Brayley, Connor Watson, they're off major injuries as well. So how, good are they going to play this year? That's a question mark. It's a team that I will look at really closely early to see if they've got good cohesion. But I've got to call it now before the season kicks off. I still think a quality of roster, I've got them 7th again.
Okay, I suppose it's a tough one to say that's a bold call because, as you said, they did finish 7th last year and they have made some really nice signings. But yeah, overall, I just think without a leader, I do see them missing the 8. But as I said, I think their ceiling is the top 8. Do we both agree that if they do make the finals, they won't really make a significant dent on the competition?
Yeah, as I say, I just don't think even their best game, but unless, a guy like Ponga goes to another level again, I don't see them winning the comp this year.
Yeah, spot on there. Let's move on to the team that came 8th last year, and officially, not my quote, they are the worst statistic team to ever make the NRL finals throughout the whole NRL history. Now, I put that stat up last year, and a lot of people said, how could you say that? But it's actually a stat. I think it went off their win-loss record, and the fact it was exactly 50-50. They also failed to defeat any top 8 teams last year. So you could say the Sharks made the final with a little bit of luck there due to their draw. They gain Luke Metcalf and Aidan Tolman. They lose Jason Bakuya, Cameron King, and Scott Sorensen. Overall, when I look at the Sharks, I think they have, for the most part, an aging roster. I think if you take Shaun Johnson out of that team last year, there is no way they come close to finals football. In fact, I think if Kevin Proctor doesn't bite Shaun Johnson, they don't make finals football, because I think Titans win that game. I just look at, there's just so many factors. Those two are the main ones. And then the third one, which I want to touch on, which is their coach, John Morris. He's off contract this year. Every other coach in the NRL is safe or has just signed with the club and is in their first year. So they will not be removed. He is the only coach on shaky ground. The newspapers know this. He has not re-signed yet. The Sharks have told him, we will not re-sign you. And that's just going to drag through the newspapers, drag the morale down at the club, screw them over in the end. I think they needed to re-sign him on a 1-year deal just to start the year. And if halfway through that deal it was, okay, he's not the man, you move him on then. The drama and the headaches that this is going to cause the club, compiled in with no Shaun Johnson until round 13, an aging roster, and the fact I thought that they probably didn't deserve to play finals last year. They are all reasons why I have the Sharks probably around the bottom 4. I think they're going to be the biggest sliding team and surprise a lot of people in the wrong way.
I don't have them as bad as that, but I also don't have them returning to the 8, and they're an interesting side to me. And I actually did really well with my predictions last year. Again, I give myself a nice wrap. 7 out of 8, I went with my top 8 predictions. The one team I didn't get right was the Sharks. And crazy when you look back at last year, the things that went wrong, like the players they lost in the pre-season and the injuries they had through the field, I think, although you said they benefited from a soft draw, it was an awesome achievement by them. And I think Johnny Morris did a hell of a job to get what he got out of the squad last year. So when a lot goes wrong, and you still make the 8, you'd think there'd generally be improvement this year. But I'm with you, there probably won't be. Like, funny you look at their stats, so you brought that up. 10 wins, 10 losses, points differential exactly 0. So you would think they're the epitome of an average team, but they weren't actually average. They were highly inconsistent. Some weeks they would pile the points on and look like world beaters. Other weeks they'd get totally rolled and be outclassed. And part of their good version, their high ceiling, was led by one of the best seasons of Shaun Johnson's career. And that's why it was so heartbreaking to see him do that Achilles, because as soon as it happened, it effectively ended their season last year. And it put such a big dent in this year's season too, because as you say, they're not expecting him back till after, the midway point. And you just don't know how players come back from such a serious injury. Like, I'll be praying that, all footy fans will be praying that he gets back to his best. Now, speaking of kind of fingers crossed for good health, Matt Moylan, is another wild card. This could be like his last chance to cement himself. They're saying that he's doing all the right things this offseason. If he could find his best form, he could somewhat fill that role of playmaking. I think they want him to play in the 5'8" position. But again, there's quite a few players you've touched on. Like, it's a bit of a mix of guys they've brought through from reserve grade. And I think it is a tight squad. And I think they're a kind of team that performs better than the sum of the parts. But then there is also the guys on the other side of the hill, the guys like Fafita, where the name is bigger than the performance at this point. I've got them 10th.
Yeah, 3 things I really want to touch on before we move on here is relating to John Morris. You said full credit to him, and full credit to him indeed. Losing your best player in Josh Morris and then having your best young gun, Bronson Xerri, suspended in one season, not easy to overcome by any stretch of the imagination. I also look at the players he has on his roster, and as you said, Andrew Fafita, Matt Moylan, and Josh Dugan are 3 players within the NRL's top 20 highest paid. Now, if you're a Sharks fan, that must frustrate the hell out of you, because they are nowhere near top 20 players anymore at this stage of their career. And the third thing I really want to wrap John Morris for, I've got the Sharks team in front of me. How many players did he debut last year or give more game time, and we really saw them develop? Now, players that could be included in that list are Braden Trindle, Connor Tracy is definitely one of them, Mulatalo, Sione Katoa, all improved. We saw the emergence of young props such as Braden Hamlin-Uele, and we saw Royce Hunt and Siosifa Talakai. We saw Toby Rudolph, and we saw Teague Wilton. This year, that should continue with players such as Franklin Pele, maybe Daniel Vasquez, Billy Magoulias. But as you say, full credit to John Morris. The fact they haven't offered him at least a one-year deal is pretty poor, I would say, by the club. But should we move on to the teams outside of the top 8 last year in 9th place?
Absolutely, and I'm excited to get your opinion on this next team.
Absolutely so.
Yeah, we'll see. I dare say you're going to be bullish on this one.
Oh, yeah. Well, we've got the Gold Coast Titans, and I will preface this before I say anything with I'm a massive Titans fan. I absolutely love the Titans. Day one fan and love the club.
So sorry guys, as I said at the top, you'll have to wait till tomorrow night to get Clarkey and my thoughts on the Titans and the prospects of all the other sides that were not in the top 8 in 2020. And there's some interesting ones, including a couple of teams I'm very bullish on, as is Clarkey, and a couple more future value plays to share out tomorrow. Then, of course, next time you'll see me will be 1 week from now, which will be for the round 1 punting preview. That'll be a shorter podcast, just me on my own, looking at every game from a punting perspective, sharing my breakdown, and of course, my best bets. But thanks for tuning in to part 1 of our season preview, and hopefully you'll enjoy part 2 coming out tomorrow. As always, gamble responsibly. Lego!